I'd like to welcome everyone here. I'm Mary Moran. I'm the Interim Director of Africana and Latin American Studies, and I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. I also really want to thank Professor April Batiste of Environmental Studies and ALST and the coordinator for Caribbean Studies, Paula Ann Reed, Asia Lee Fatt, and other students of the Caribbean Students Association who worked so hard to put on this whole wonderful week of events that we're calling Caribbean Week. It's not over yet. There is the Island Fete happening Friday night, and then over the weekend, the dance residency with Wendell Bullen on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if you've been coming to all the Caribbean Studies events this week, you can continue right through the weekend and dance on multiple occasions. So that sounds great. I'd also like to thank Nikita Johnson, who is our ALST program assistant, Amanda Stewart, our former administrative assistant, who has now moved on to another job, and any of our student workers who also helped with putting this whole series of events together. The sponsor for this event is ALST and the Arnold A. Scio Chair in Diversity and Community. Now, I'm really delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for Caribbean Week, my colleague Julian Bain DeBross Cresser, long name, who is this year's A. Lindsay O'Connor Visiting Chair and Assistant Professor of Africana and Latin American Studies. Professor Cresser holds BA and PhD degrees from the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica, where he has also served as a lecturer in the Department of History and Archaeology and in the Institute of Caribbean Studies. He has conducted research on Afro-Caribbean religions, Christian missions, and German and Chinese immigration to Jamaica, as well as on the topic of his talk today, the connections between sport and society in the Caribbean. His publications include articles on the history of Jamaican cricket in Jamaica Journal and in the edited book Victorian Jamaica from Duke University Press, and the monograph, A History of Cricket in Jamaica, 1870 to the present, published by the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of the West Indies. He is also the co-author of a textbook on social studies for the Caribbean, and has curated several exhibitions for the University of the West Indies Museum. Beyond the university, he has been a board member of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, on the management committee for the establishment of a national sports museum, and a member of the Jamaica 50 Committee of the Ministry of Youth, Culture, and Sports. And although he is certainly an academic expert on the topic of sports in the Caribbean, it's important to note that he is a practitioner of sports as well, having been a player, a coach, an administrator, and even a television commentator. And so he has achieved the dream of many of us in finding a seamless connection between our intellectual lives and our personal passions. So please join me in welcoming him for this talk on sport and the construction of national identity in Jamaica.
Thank you very much. That's good. Thank you very much, Prof. Moran. The first thing I'd like to do is to, extend my gratitude for the opportunity that I have, not just to be here today speaking at Caribbean Week, but to be at Colgate. I was only supposed to be at Colgate for one semester. I was invited back and also given the chair of O'Connor visiting assistant professor. So I'm very happy that I could have spent the entire year at Colgate, and I'd like to thank Prof. Moran, Prof. Moore, Prof. Neems, everybody who has contributed to that, and Prof. Baptiste for the invitation to speak to you today. Glad to be here. I know that oxtail and rice and peas and other things are waiting, and Prof. Baptiste asked me to keep this to 45 minutes, so I'm going to try my best to do that. The first thing that I'd like you to do for me, just as an activity, is, I'm not going to ask you the answer, but just think about it, is to close your eyes and think about a Jamaican sports star. So if I say to you a Jamaican sports star, what is the image that forms in your mind? Just think about that for a second. What is the image that comes to mind when you hear that phrase, Jamaican sports star? All right, you can open your eyes now. I don't know what images you had in mind. I don't know if this was the image that many of you would have formed. This is Asia Leafat. This is also Asia Leafat, who played qualifying matches for the Jamaica women's football team that has now qualified for the Women's World Cup. So we are very proud of her. But this is not just about celebrating Asia and the Jamaican women's team's qualification, though. I do want you to think about that exercise and what image came to your mind and why or why not. Why it may or may not have been the same image as Asia. Very quickly, the inspiration behind this presentation today. Prof. Baptiste asked me for, I think there's a bit of, Prof. Baptiste asked me for a kind of preliminary title when she invited me to give this lecture, and I suggested sport and national identity in Jamaica. The idea behind this lecture really comes from my involvement in a conference in Jamaica in 2015, which came under the banner of the Reimagine Jamaica project. But the conference itself was specifically titled Brand Jamaica. And I was invited to come to this conference and to give my thoughts specifically on sports in this age of globalization and the impact that it has on Brand Jamaica. There are a number of things from that project from my participation in that conference that struck me. One of the things was that there was this kind of like tremendous pushback against the idea of nation branding. People seem to be very uncomfortable with the idea of nation branding. And you saw many responses like these that I've taken from Twitter, where people suggested that what we should be doing is more focusing on our own sense of self, who we are, what our attributes, values, characteristics are, rather than on the idea of nation branding, which I think people thought was a kind of vulgar public relations exercise, the kind of nation equivalent of putting out your best china for visitors and hiding the dirty laundry. The second thing, that you can see here is also the idea that, well, there's something that needs to be fixed. Whether we want to call it nation branding, or if we think more in terms of this sense of self or characteristics or national identity, there are things that are broken. Another thing that struck me coming to that conference is this almost uniform, almost unanimous belief that sport has played a very positive role in shaping Jamaican national identity, and it could be used to fix a number of the problems that we have. It seemed to me that people were generally very uncritical about the role that sports played, and saw it purely in positive terms. And that comes from a kind of structural functionalist view of sport as being a part of interrelated social activities and institutions that help to promote consensus, help to bond us together and serve these positive values. You see that being recognized, for instance, in Jamaica's policy on sport, where there's, as you see here, this belief that sport could be used to build networks, to support ideals of peace, fraternity, non-violence, and other things as well. You also see this type of attitude manifested in projects like this, Fight for Peace from Rio to Kingston, where the idea behind it was to use sports to reduce youth violence. So this type of attitude to sport I found to be very common and prevailing, not just at the conference, but generally in sporting circles in Jamaica. Why is this issue of identity important? Why are we talking about it? Well, identity can be a very powerful force of empowerment, but it can also be something that restrains us, limits us. Jamaicans, in constructing our sense of self, in constructing our identity, have had to confront ideologies that supported slavery, that supported colonialism, that in many ways exist in new forms today. And when we internalize these ideas, it can lead to a deficit of self-confidence, deficit of self-esteem, maybe even self-hatred, things that restrain us and prevent us from achieving our full potential. So this question of identity is very important. Identity is also important when seen from the sense of how are we recognized by others. And that is important because we exist in an increasingly globalized world. We have to interact with partners. And as a small island developing state, having to deal with a globe dominated by the North, if we don't have this very strong sense of self, of who we are and our place in the world, then we will not be able to relate to these countries. Something similar has been suggested here by Sheila Johansson in her story as history. This idea that minority groups cannot afford to not have this collective awareness of the past. Otherwise, we become vulnerable to the imposition of not just dubious, but discriminatory stereotypes. The need for, therefore, attention to the theatre identities is also recognized in Jamaica's national cultural policy, which recognizes this issue of low self-esteem as a problem and something that needs to be addressed. One of the things that perhaps, earlier comments were referring to when they said that we need to fix Jamaica. So identity and identity formation is something that's very important and something that needed to be looked on. But you notice that the conference was called Reimagine Jamaica. And there's also the question about why we need to reimagine Jamaica at this time. It also speaks to the fact that there have been earlier imaginings of what Jamaica is and who Jamaicans are. Identity is important because it also provides a sense of belonging. That was important to Jamaica in particular as a newly independent nation in 1962. When that moment of independence comes and that British flag, that Union Jack comes down on August 6, 1962, and the Jamaican flag goes up for the first time, we have this very real question to confront, and that is, who are we? Yesterday we were British, and today we are Jamaican. What does that mean exactly? Another concern for this new nation at this moment of independence is unity. Jamaica is a nation created out of tremendous diversity. And therefore, there was the need at that point for a kind of identity that pulled us together. United we would stand, divided we would fall. What you then saw in not just Jamaica, but a lot of Caribbean territories then is a kind of promotion of this image of cultural synthesis. This idea that draws, on the concept of Creole, of creolization, of the idea that the different diverse groups that have come to Jamaica, the different ethnic groups that make up this population of Jamaica have integrated, have mixed, their cultures have blended, and out of that we have something that we call Jamaican, a Creole culture born here in this space, in this new world, out of these old world cultures. And we also see that being reflected in the motto, out of many, one people. And this has many symbolic representations. Certainly when I was growing up in Jamaica, there was a photograph very similar to this that used to be on our $2 bill. I think every generation we have a new photograph that represents this concept of out of many, one people. So identity is very important for providing that sense of belonging. But as I said, the conference suggested that there needed to be a reimagining. That 50, 60 years after independence, there are issues in the way we see ourselves, the way we define ourselves, the way we define what Jamaican is. Some of those include ideas about Jamaican and Jamaicanness that still excludes certain groups or restricts groups' participation in membership in this Jamaican community. In many ways, we still have not come to terms with our blackness, and when I say blackness, I'm speaking of dark-skinned Jamaicans. We haven't come to terms with our Africanness in embracing and celebrating these things. So we have a situation where, for instance, this girl was initially suspended from school, sent home because of her hairstyles. And I've seen that happening in other parts of the world, but to see it happening in Jamaica, the place that birthed Rastafari, point to the fact that, there are still a lot of issues that we have to confront. Other groups are also excluded from full participation in membership. The LGBT community in particular is a group that is excluded in Jamaica, is marginalized, is stigmatized. So there are concerns that we have. One can ask whether the very motto that we have in some ways hinders the achievement of this kind of integration that we desire, simply because it marginalizes blackness. And when you look back on the picture, there's this image of harmony of the different groups coming together, but if you also look very closely at it, you'll realize that darker skinned Jamaicans are largely marginalized in the picture. This does not represent, the presence of blackness in Jamaica. Jamaica is by far a majority black country. And so there are many critics of this idea of out of many one people, this feeling that this idea of this harmonious cultural synthesis really still marginalizes black expressions and our black population. So, having spoken about why identity, why reimagining identity at this time, what is the role that sport can play? Many scholars have talked about the value of sport in constructing identities, group identities, national identities. I had a class today where we were talking about sport, and various students in the class were all giving their experiences of sport and what sport meant to them. And, relating how sport brought them closer to family members, brought them closer to peer groups, brought them closer to schools, communities, the states that they came from. We ended up looking at and talking about March Madness and the type of intense rivalry that comes out of these sporting competitions. So sports have always been important in terms of how we see ourselves. If we also think about how national identities are formed, and we think about the role that communication plays, media plays, television and internet now plays in constructing this identity, then sport has to be considered, because sport is a very big part of the materials that we consume on the internet and on television. So globally, it is recognized that sport plays a very important role in identity formation, in promoting senses of belonging. What role has it played in Jamaica? This is a picture of one of the very first Jamaican cricket teams. Now, there are some people who would not be surprised by that, but some who might be. They think that the very first Jamaican team is a team of largely middle-aged white men. And you can very easily tell that this team is not representative of the population. What it does point to, though, is the type of obstacles that sport had to overcome in Jamaica. Sport entered the Jamaican space, when modern sport as we know it entered the Jamaican space in the middle of the 19th century. By the late 1800s, cricket had taken root, but it was largely a white elite game. Most of the clubs were formed by members of this predominantly white elite, planters, merchants. And these clubs were exclusive. They were white only. They were generally for the social elite. They excluded blacks, they excluded the poor, and they also excluded women. So there's this tremendous amount of prejudice and discrimination in the game. And that kind of sets up sport to be a very important agency for the construction of national identity, because there's this fight to be included. Initially, other clubs are formed. Clubs like the Kensington Cricket Club, which was for middle-class whites, but by the early 1900s had a number of brown Jamaicans playing for it. For most black Jamaicans, introduction to cricket meant playing cricket on the beaches, meant playing cricket in the cane fields, meant playing in various improvised forms of the game in which they brought their own kinds of cultural traditions and forms and aesthetic to the game, and started to develop their own cultural values. Eventually, black clubs started to be formed and played against initially white clubs in friendly games until they proved themselves on the field and were admitted into the elite competitions. So by 1901 in Jamaica, you have black teams playing against elite teams in the country. And you have a team like, for instance, the Lucas Cricket Club, which is the first black team, and it's a black working class team that gets admitted into the Senior Cup cricket competition in Jamaica. Within 4 years, the Lucas Cricket Club, this club of working class blacks, is the champion of Jamaica's cricket. That's 1904. In 1905, Lucas are champions again. In 1906, Lucas are champions again. They would have been champions in 1907 if earthquake hadn't destroyed most of Kingston and caused the competition to be abandoned. But here you have this black working class team within a very short time coming to the fore, dominating cricket in Jamaica. And many of these black working class cricketers become some of the first heroes to other black working class Jamaicans, because they have tackled this racism, they have tackled this prejudice that is in the game. They have tackled ideologies that say that they are inferior, that they are not equal, that whites are superior. And they have disproven them on the field of play. And very soon, the image of the Jamaican team changes and it becomes more representative. And you have black working class Jamaicans forcing their way into the team. You have other cricketers that have come along that also help to challenge a lot of the stereotypes in the game. And George Headley becomes, in a sense, the first West Indian cricket hero. And his story is illustrative and inspirational. George is somebody who was born in Panama but grew up in Raytown, Jamaica, which is a depressed community. He learned to play his cricket at a place called Crab Hole Park, which was just by the sea and called Crab Hole Park because, as you can imagine, it was littered with crab holes. And this is the conditions in which he learns to play his cricket. And he develops a style of cricket that is suited to these conditions. And when he plays, initially he is frowned upon. The style that he has, the stance that he has is unorthodox. But this is the style that he has brought to the game, the aesthetic that he has brought to the game. And George becomes a superstar almost immediately. And again, helps to kind of destroy these stereotypes that blacks are inferior, whether it be on the cricket field or in other aspects of life. And it's important because this is occurring at a time where there is a lot of social ferment. There's protests, there's the rise of labor movements, working class movements in the Caribbean. In the 1930s, we have ended slavery for a century, but very little has changed in terms of the economic and social conditions of the mass of Jamaican people. And there is protest, there is agitation. And a part of it is this demand for greater autonomy and demand for greater self-government. Ultimately, it will be a demand for independence. And at the same time that these demands are being made, you have West Indian cricketers, Jamaican cricketers like George Headley, going around the world, dominating cricket, and proving inspirational for blacks in Jamaica and in the wider Caribbean. So cricket really, provides our first heroes. It provides our first superstars. It inspires Jamaicans. It is very empowering in that sense. And our sporting prowess continues. At the same time, we are having these movements towards independence in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. And then, so you have this very close association with sport. This is a clip from the 1952 Olympics in Helsinki, where Jamaican 4x4 team of Les Leng, George Roden, Herb McKinley, and Arthur Wint won the 4x400 meter relay, the kind of signature event at the Olympics. And this moment in 1952 is a moment of tremendous pride for Jamaicans, and a moment of national celebration. And sport continues. Should I allow you to just go on to the end of it? Yeah. All right. Spoiler, we win. There's some kind of glory. All right. And, as I said, it creates this tremendous sense of pride amongst Jamaicans. And it also inspires them at a time when we're demanding independence. We're demanding to be our own independence. We're demanding to be our own people. Post 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, we continue to produce sports stars. We have Donald Quarry, who won gold medal in the 200 meters in the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. We've had athletes like Merlene Ottey, who is the most decorated woman sprinter of all time. In 1997, Jamaica qualified for the men's FIFA World Cup in France in 1998. And in doing so became the first English-speaking Caribbean country to qualify for the World Cup. And again, these were moments of tremendous national celebration. The entire country came out to celebrate. I remember being in the stadium for that final match when we, drew Mexico to qualify for the World Cup, and the entire stadium was full. People were jumping over the walls to get in. All of the pathways in between seats were blocked, creating a fire hazard. But it's Jamaica, so that was just a part of the celebration. People were driving for weeks with Jamaican flags on the cars flying. There were reports that crime rates had dropped significantly whenever matches were being played. And there's this tremendous outpouring of national pride and unity. Right? When matches were being played, it seemed as if all Jamaicans came together. And there are other moments like that. This is a picture of our national stadium, and the event that is being portrayed here is our national high school championships. That's track and field. Jamaica hosts the largest high school track and field championship meet in the entire world. And champs is an amazing spectacle. Champs is an amazing spectacle. And each year, dozens, if not hundreds, of American scouts come to Jamaica to watch champs, to scout for talent. We have girls and boys who are at the ages of 14 and 15 who are running times that will get them into the semifinals of Olympic sprint events. So it is an amazing event. The amount of talent that is on earth is tremendous. And again, it is this moment of national coming together, national celebration, national pride. So sport has really contributed to this sense of empowerment, this sense of we as a people can do things we can overcome. A phrase that we have in Jamaica that kind of represents that spirit is "Williko but witalawa," which in a way translates to we may be small, but we are resilient, we are determined. And there are many things in our history that have contributed to that, whether it is overcoming the obstacles of slavery or colonial society. But there's continued to be this type of resilience to the obstacles that we face. And sport has continued to contribute to that and has perpetuated that. This idea that small Jamaica can conquer the world. So when in 2008 we had Usain Bolt and Shelley Fraser start to take over the world of track and field, again there is this reinforcement of this idea that we little but we talawa. Whenever I think about this phrase, I can't help but also hear Peter Tosh's song. I don't know how many are familiar with Peter Tosh, a former member of Bob Marley and the Wailers. But he had a song that was entitled Stepping Razor, in which he says, I'm like a stepping razor, don't you watch my size, I'm dangerous. Right? And you see this type of attitude coming out in other expressions of popular culture in Jamaica, not just sport. But sport plays a very big role in that. So we see this history of achievement, this history of inspiration. And that is one of the roles that sport has played in shaping the way we think about ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we see ourselves. What is also interesting is I did some random searches of Jamaican sports teams. I put in Jamaica track and field, Jamaica football, and pause for a moment and think about these images. And again, think back to the very first exercise that I asked you to do in imagining what a Jamaican sports star looks like. And think about whether maybe your imaginations matched any of these images. And again, why that might be the case. And I don't know what you are noticing as you look through these images, but I brought them up because when I look through these images, I'm seeing, first of all, a preponderance of black faces. And this is very important because what sport has done is provided this medium, provided this institution, this agency for the representation of black Jamaicans, this representation of blacks. We can look on sports and see ourselves being represented. And that is very important. At the same time, what it has also meant is that very often, now, in a sense, the table is almost turned. That, whiteness now is in many ways excluded from the conversation about Jamaicanness. This is a special case because this cricketer, Brendan Nash, had Jamaican parents, but was born in Australia, grew up in Australia. Didn't make it as a cricketer in Australia and came to the West Indies to play for the West Indies because the West Indies were at the time, still are, a considerably weaker team. And he did make the West Indies team, but there was a lot of pushback. The pushback was complicated. Some people felt that he simply couldn't cut it in Australia, and West Indies was his second choice, and therefore he wasn't really committed to playing for the West Indies. Some people felt that he didn't serve a long enough qualification period. He came back and within 3 months he had been selected for the team. But his race was also an issue, and that came up in a lot of the discussions. And again, that has to be seen against the history of cricket in the West Indies, where we had to fight for a very long time to overcome these ideas of white superiority. What you would also have noticed, or maybe not noticed when you look through all of those images, is a lot of faces of women, right? If we think about the role of media in constructing national identity, and we say that sport plays a very important role because sport is a big part of what is being consumed on television, on the internet, then we have to also recognize that what is really being consumed is male sports, is men's sports and boys' sports. I don't have figures for coverage in Jamaica, but these are some international figures that I think are fairly reflective of what takes place right across the board. So here we have the comparison between the men's World Cup finals in 2010 and the women's World Cup finals in 2011, and there's this massive disparity. Right. And you see it in other aspects of the coverage of sports. So if our identities are being constructed through representations of sports in the media, then most of what we're seeing, most of the representation we're seeing is a representation of men. And of course, you can also see it in terms of, followings. I don't know how significant followings on Twitter are, but if you think Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who is a multiple gold medal winner at the Olympics, she has 76,000 followers. Veronica Campbell-Brown, also an incredibly decorated sprinter, has 31,000. But then you compare that to Usain Bolt with 3.7 million. And it's not just that Usain Bolt is obviously a superstar. Even somebody who is far less distinguished, far less accomplished, Yuan Blake, has hundreds of thousands of followers. So the conversations that are taking place, the representation that is taking place is one that is largely masculine. And that is, of course, because in part, sport enters this space as a gendered activity. It comes with sexist attitudes. There is the idea that sport is important in constructing ideas of masculinity. It's important in constructing all of those characteristics that Victorians expected men to have: physical strength, stoicism, discipline, loyalty. And those attitudes transfer to the Jamaican space, and sport is very much initially like that, and has continued to be like that. Even though there are some changes, and you saw with people like Veronica Campbell-Brown, people like Merlene Ottey, Dion Hemmings and others, who have achieved great things in terms of sport in Jamaica. You still largely see this bias towards male sport. Female sport is largely underfunded. There's very little coverage. There's very little remuneration. So one of the things that we have to bear in mind in thinking about the way sport affects or influences the way we think about who is the us, who is the we as Jamaicans. That, a lot of the images that we're seeing are of Jamaican men. Very closely related to this idea of gender is, how we express masculinity and femininity. I know nothing of Dustin Brown's sexuality. He's not open about anything, but Dustin Brown is a tennis player who was born in Germany but to Jamaican parentage and decided to represent Jamaica. And initially there's this celebration of Dustin Brown. He has locks, we love it, he's very animated, he's a good tennis player. He beat Nadal in a tournament, and there's this, again, this tremendous celebration of another Jamaican sports star. But then a picture surfaces in which he has his tongue pierced, and all of a sudden the reaction changes. Right? Illustrated, for instance, by this picture. I don't know how many people in this room can read that right away and understand what that says. But essentially, the person is saying that I had wanted to celebrate this Rasta, but when I found out that he had his tongue pierced, instead, it is now burning fire. And in Jamaican parlance, this idea of burning fire is condemning. And so you have this idea of who we are, how we should express ourselves, and when that expression doesn't fit the sense of Jamaicanness, then there's this ostracism. So, but as I said, there is some progress. You have people like Diane Hemmings, our first gold medal winner, other women athletes. As I pointed out at the beginning, Jamaica has become the first Caribbean nation to qualify for the Women's World Cup. In sports like netball, we are consistently in the top 5 in the world. And this does give us this tremendous sense of pride as well and representation of women in sports. But again, it's fraught with problems because I have a colleague in Jamaica who did a study on women's football in Jamaica. And she found in her study that the attitude of the people that she had spoken to was that if women were good in football, then they were masculine or lesbian. And that is this, and there's this rejection again of women as sports players simply because of these attitudes towards gender and gender expressions. So, plenty of work still to do. I also wanted to point out that we assume, because we are proud of our accomplishments in the world of sports, that the outside world also recognizes us in the same way and presents us in the same way, and that also needs to be questioned. You'll realize that in the coverage of black bodies generally, there is this bias. There is this concentration on the physical attributes of black players, and very often they're described in very racist terms. This is from an incident before a Cricket World Cup in which Mark Nicholas, the person to your furthest left, in speaking about the West Indies' chances of winning that Cricket World Cup, suggested that there were a lot of physically talented players, but they have no brains. We happened to win the World Cup, and he apologized for his comment afterwards. But ideas like black sports people being physically talented but not smart are prevalent. In the Football World Cup last year, for instance, somebody did a study of the number of times that the phrase pace and power was used when describing the Senegal football team. And it was just ridiculous to read all of these excerpts. And every time the Senegal football team was described in a match report, the exact phrase pace and power was used. And there's an incident after one of the matches where the Senegal coach rightly got upset and said, listen, almost every one of my players play in European leagues, play in the top leagues in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, in England. You don't get into those leagues unless you have football loose. But ideas like this are commonplace. And you see this animalization of black bodies in sports all the time. Be it in America, be it in Europe. At the height of West Indies dominance, I showed a video to some of my students last night called Fire in Babylon. which kind of spoke to the West Indies' rise to dominance in the 1970s. And it really highlighted the role that fast bowling played. But the reactions to those West Indies' dominance based on this fast bowling at the time were far from complimentary. And again, described these West Indian black bodies in these terms of being beastly, fearsome. And there's no recognition for the kind of cricket talent, cricket strategy, cricket brains that went into the West Indies dominance. Fire in Babylon is a very exciting movie. Most of the people that I show it to love it. Even as Caribbean people, we get excited because there's all of these images of fast bowlers, bombarding batsmen with bouncers. And I know for many of you that means absolutely nothing. But if you think about a pitcher in baseball, pitching at somebody's head to back him up off the plate, there's this constant barrage of those types of deliveries. And the movie really plays on this idea that the West Indian cricket team had to face Babylon, injustice, and that injustice is represented in our history of slavery and colonialism, the racism that we had to face even after slavery had ended, and that we reacted against this Babylon, this injustice, with fire. And it's wonderful and it's exciting, and as I said, gets a reaction. But I'm also very critical of those types of representations because, again, it concentrates on our sports stars as physical talents, as powerful, as intimidating, and never really gives credit to the strategy and the cricket and sporting intelligence that we have. I also have to ask the question, to what extent maybe we have internalized some of these ideas and even come to see ourselves in that way. In sometimes the nicknames that we choose, in the images that we project to the rest of the world. So here's Jamaican 400-meter runner whose nickname is Donkey Man, and the editor writing this article kind of played on that with this idea of gallops. Ewan Blake went through a period in his life where he called himself the Beast and grew his nails long. This is a picture of him ringing the bell at the Lord's Cricket Ground in London and going into beast mode. He has left that behind now. But, in many ways, perhaps we have internalized these ways of thinking about ourselves. So, to bring this all together, that conference got me thinking about identity in Jamaica and what are some of the things that we possibly need to reflect on, to think about ourselves as Jamaicans and possibly to change. One of the things that I saw constantly in the Jamaican classroom as a teacher is that issue of low self-esteem. And in a sense, that informed my teaching philosophy in a Jamaican or Caribbean classroom, this idea that I needed to empower. And when I taught history from that perspective. This need to share with persons who had no knowledge of their past, no knowledge of the achievements of Jamaicans and Caribbean people, and even African black people more broadly. And therefore, we're suffering from this crisis of confidence. Sport can definitely be harnessed to do that, to accomplish that. Similarly, when I teach in a Colgate classroom, it's something that I've struggled with since I've been here, this idea of, why am I teaching here? I need an answer to that question, right? And, again, it goes back to this issue of identity. How are we recognized? And I confront that daily in my goings around in Hamilton, in this space, thinking about how people see me and how that influences my interactions with them. Any migrant, I think, in a space like this, which lacks diversity, constantly deals with those types of thoughts. And so part of teaching here is about, sharing with people outside of the Caribbean our stories about ourselves, why we are the way we are, how we have gotten here, right? To, in a sense, enhance a kind of understanding of the Caribbean and understanding of who we are. Again, sport can play a role in that, but what I'm trying to also show is that we need to be very critical of the role that sport has played and can play. Because sport in the Caribbean has also played a very significant role in promoting ideas about gender and sexuality that limits the participation of many Jamaicans in this we, in this us. It has also promoted stereotypes that disempower instead of empower. And I think that if the Jamaican government is going to create a sports policy that seeks to harness sports, these are things to be wary of. A final note, at the beginning I mentioned that there was this Fight for Peace project. I, along with two colleagues, did a study joint between Jamaica and Barbados, looking very specifically at the links between participation in organized sport and juvenile delinquency. And what we found from our preliminary study is that there's actually a positive correlation, that the more young boys in high schools participated in organized sport, is actually the more likely they will be to be involved in juvenile delinquency, which kind of, again, forces us to sit back and think about, and question a lot of those types of functionalist notions of sport as being a very positive thing in our society. And essentially, that is the conclusion that I want to bring out of this, that sport has played a tremendous role in shaping how we see ourselves, but sometimes that is for good as well as for bad. Thank you very much. Yes, questions? Comments, feedback? I felt like I tried to do a whole lot and left out a whole lot, but if there are other things you want to ask about. Or maybe we just want to eat oxtail and rice and peas. Yes.
Professor Cressel, thank you for your talk. So you ended with sort of just giving us that teaser, right? That there's this correlation between actually organized sport and increasing juvenile delinquency. Were you able to figure out why that is? Because there is that perception that and many Caribbean mothers, right, and parents are like, you're going to go play this sport and be in this youth club, and you better not be out in the streets, and that kind of thing. So, any reason why you all think that relationship existed versus the other way?
All right, I will answer, but it looks like profound.
Tied to that question, I presume you're thinking about boys.
What's that?
I presume
Yes,
you're
boys,
thinking about
young boys.
What about girls?
No, our study was just to look at juvenile delinquency amongst boys because of programs like these. And again, the kind of inspiration behind a study like that was we started to see more and more of these programs, specifically Fight for Peace. There's another one that uses martial arts, goes into inner city communities and tries to use martial arts to, deal with conflict resolution, other issues affecting young boys and men in inner city communities as a kind of strategy to reduce violence. Because obviously, crime and violence is a very serious problem in Jamaica. So we thought, well, a lot of these studies are carried out on assumptions, and there's long-held assumption that sport is good for inspiring discipline. You just mentioned, Caribbean mothers want you to go and play sport because we assume that it helps you to manage your time well, that you have to be dedicated, you have to be punctual, you have to do all of these things. To answer the question as to why, and again, it was a preliminary study, we did both quantitative and qualitative studies. And the qualitative studies kind of reveal that sport promoted this kind of hyper-masculinity, right? Where there's this aggression, this ultra-competitiveness, this need to prove yourself stronger, better, badder. We have that kind of like bad John mentality too. So what sport was doing is, instead of promoting, discipline, promoting teamwork, cooperation, was really promoting this kind of, hyper-masculinity and intense competition and aggression. So, the boys who were involved in, and there are other things as well. It's in terms of, like, for instance, status. A lot of, sports superstars, they are, held in high esteem by their peers in school, and people come up for them, they get away with more. Teachers very often make concessions to these sports stars, so there are a whole host of factors. But the main thing that we saw coming up Yeah, but what we were finding is that boys who were playing sports were, were smoking weed, were missing class, that's the delinquency we were looking at. Missing school, skipping school, being arrested, smoking, ganja, other illegal drugs, things like that. So we're not talking about, them being ultra competitive on the field and, leaving it there. We're talking about outside of that, the idea would be, as I said, the assumption is that, they would be more disciplined in all the areas of life on the phone, and now they're actually encouraged to break the rules.
And did you see that pattern across socioeconomic classes as well when you factor in socioeconomic class?
Yes, actually, we did 6 schools in all, 3 in Jamaica, 3 in Barbados, and we tried to look at schools that fit different socioeconomic classes. There was a much stronger correlation in the schools that fit that lower economic bracket. But generally, the correlation was the same. Yes.
So, I'm not deeply familiar with the British Empire, but I'm just thinking of the national imagination, the struggle for national identity. Is there a strange dynamic where the cricket team is really somewhat different type of dynamic, since it's a game of empire? I mean, they're all games of empire, right? But it's associated with the British Empire as opposed to the track and field and the soccer teams. Is there a slightly different dynamic going on there, and a tension between the two? Where you see, I'm
No. I think it's a very good question.
So you're still in the empire, but
right. I'm thinking of one of the main persons who has researched and written on West Indies cricket, Hilary Beckles. In one of his articles, poses this question that we have to think about when we think about the impact that it has had. And I'm trying to remember the exact phrase, but he says something like, is it a case of fostering, in a sense, liberation ideologies, or has it merely reproduced a kind of colonized mentality? And, there are ways in which cricket has been this liberating force, this agency of resistance, of rejection of British values, of the promotion of our own ways of playing, ways of thinking about the game, ways of sport. But then there's also been, to an extent, an acceptance of a lot of the kind of ideas that came along with cricket. And you still see that. It's less and less now, simply because in many ways cricket has declined in popularity. But also, I think part of it is that cricket no longer plays the kind of political role that it once did. So 1950s, 60s, 70s, very closely allied with that nationalist struggles, and then in the immediate post-emancipation, post-independence era, this kind of need to, as new nations, identify ourselves, make a statement about ourselves in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Now, you don't really see that at all. But you do see, as I said, many of the kind of values surviving. I talked about gender, that's definitely, gender and sexuality is definitely a part of it, but just other codes as well. I remember there's this phenomenon of muscular Christianity is part of, this sport culture that came to the Caribbean. This idea that, good Christian men would be physically strong, and sport was a very important part of that, and they needed to be strong to serve the needs of empire. And you see those kind of like muscular Christian traditions being transported to the Caribbean, taking root in many places, and surviving well into, to an extent, even the present. And I was going to say, I remember a story of a cricket administrator who came from an institution called Boys' Town, which was a Methodist institution, which was heavily based on these kind of muscular Christian principles. And he grew up in Boys' Town, and when he became a sport administrator, he would, there's a story of him driving through one of our resort towns and seeing one of our Jamaican cricketers walking in this resort town in, jeans and a shirt, and he drove his car right up beside him on the sidewalk and pulled over the car and said, "Listen, tuck your shirt in your pants." And this national cricketer, who was a 25-year-old man, had to stop and tuck his shirt in his pants and walk on. And so there are these ideas still about decorum, about appearance, about the cultural behaviors and attitudes that have persisted for a very long time. Now, the other part of the question is, do we see that in other games? And I think less so, right? And I think part of that is because these other sports never had that type of political and cultural significance that cricket did. Many of them took off at a later time. Also, I don't think these sports meant the same thing to the English as well. So, for instance, a lot of the middle and upper class English men who came to the Caribbean promoted something like cricket, which they believed was a gentlemanly game and would, inculcate all of these values. But football was more seen, soccer was more seen as, a game of hooligans and didn't get the same type of promotion. So I think part of it is also how the British view these sports. Another part of it may well be that these sports have really taken off in an age of sport as business. And a lot of those earlier values are no longer associated with sports in general. So football, track and field have really taken off in the last 20 to 30 years. The values that we see associated with those games are not at all like what we used to associate with cricket. Moxdale time?
Okay, so following immediately now, there will be food.
So I don't know.
All right.
It's Jamaicans who are providing, so we're not entirely sure it's on time.